Chapter 6, Second First Contact. Section 1, The Second Sunrise. The night of 14th of August 2026 belonged to the Perseid meteor shower at first. Across the dark half of Earth, families dragged lawn chairs into backyards, teenagers climbed rooftops with cheap telescopes, and lovers lay on blankets waiting for streaks of ancient ice to burn up overhead. Then, at 4:17 UTC, something new ignited low in the eastern sky. It began as a pinpoint brighter than Venus, a hard diamond against the scattering Perseids. Within 30 seconds, it had swollen into a blue-white needle that refused to fade. Phones rose by the millions. Live streams stuttered under the sudden traffic. Someone in Lagos shouted first. It was moving against the stars, west to east, accelerating. In a small apartment above a Jakarta night market, 9-year-old Kailis Vey jerked awake with the certainty that knocks at the soul. She padded barefoot to the balcony, night shawl forgotten on the floor, and stared upward. The new star had grown a tail now, a searing torch plume that turned the smog over the city the color of molten copper. Kailis had spent her entire life under a single yellow sun and the dull orange haze of orbital mirrors. She had never seen anything burn that color. "Mom," she whispered, voice cracking with wonder rather than fear. "We have a new sun." Downstairs, her parents stumbled onto the street with the rest of the building. Across the planet, the same scene repeated. A fisherman in Newfoundland dropped his coffee mug. An astronomer in Chile forgot to breathe. A Tokyo salaryman on the last train home pressed his forehead to the window and began very quietly to cry. The object was no longer a star. It was a lance of pure azure fire, impossibly bright, impossibly controlled, crossing the heavens faster than any orbital decay. Amateur calculations flooded the reborn internet. Magnitude -14 and climbing, spectral signature of a deuterium-helium-3 fusion torch, running clean at 1.2 gravities. Someone with access to the old Mauna Kea arrays confirmed the impossible. The plume was 3 kilometers long and perfectly symmetrical. In the rebuilt city of New Geneva, built into the bones of the old Swiss arcology, the night shift at the Planetary Defense Array forgot protocol and simply opened every external loudspeaker. The sky itself seemed to roar. Children who had never known true darkness screamed, not in terror, but the way their ancestors once screamed at northern lights. High above the atmosphere, the Astralis held its final deceleration burn. 41 crew members who had not felt real gravity in 819 years stood on the observation deck with bare feet pressed to warm deck plates. Riley Quinn, forever 26, had both fists clenched so hard the stumps of his missing fingers ached. Lena Voss floated beside the main viewport, grease still under her nails from the last radiator patch 8 centuries ago, tears sliding sideways in 0G. On the bridge, Cale Drace watched Earth swell from a bright disk into a living world of cloud and ocean and nightside jewels. The bone flute was in his pocket, warm from his hand. Rex's voice, softer than anyone had ever heard it, filled the speakers. Torch cut off in 5, 4, 3, plume collapse. We are ballistic and beautiful, my friends. Welcome home. The flame winked out. For one heartbeat, the sky over Earth went dark again. Then 10 billion human beings realized the new star was still there, coasting now, a silver needle catching the sun, falling toward them like an answered prayer, 74,000 years in the making. In Jakarta, Kailis Vey lifted both arms toward the light, the way her most ancient ancestors once lifted infants into golden beams on a moonless steppe. She did not know why she did it. She only knew the gesture felt older than language. Across the planet, dogs began to howl. Church bells nobody had rung in decades started clanging by themselves. An old woman in Nairobi, who had survived the long winter and the ash centuries, dropped to her knees in the red dust and laughed until she choked. The second sunrise had come from the stars, and it was carrying family. Section 2, The Broadcast. The silence after torch cutoff lasted exactly 7 seconds. Long enough for every satellite dish, rooftop antenna, and child's toy radio on Earth to strain toward the new star. Then the carrier wave hit, clean and strong on every frequency from long wave to gamma. A single human voice, Male, steady, speaking English, so perfect it sounded like it had been frozen in the 20th century and only just thawed. People of Earth, this is Australis Actual, Commander Caldera speaking. 74,000 years ago, 300 of your ancestors were taken from the Eurasian steppe by entities who believed humanity's spark would die in the coming winter. They were wrong about the winter. They were right about the spark. We are their descendants. We were born beneath twin suns 2,520 light-years from here. We crossed the dark with one promise carved in blood and ivory. We would return, and we would pay the debt. Tonight the debt is paid. The rock that would have ended you in 2026 never came. The ash that choked your grandparents for centuries was never breathed. Your sky is clean because we carried fire across 819 years to keep it that way. We do not come as gods. We do not come as conquerors. We come as family who remember a winter that never happened. If you can hear this, look east. We are the bright star that just killed its torch. We will be in high orbit within the hour. We request permission to descend, to walk your soil, to trade stories, seeds, and songs. We bring no weapons hotter than the truth. This is Australis Actual, standing by on all channels. We are listening. The transmission ended with 3 clear notes played on a bone flute, simple, haunting, rising like smoke. For one stunned heartbeat, the planet held its breath. Then every radio answered at once. A ham operator in rural Nebraska keyed his antique microphone with shaking hands and managed only, "Welcome home." A traffic chopper pilot over São Paulo forgot to fly and had to be talked down by a controller who was openly weeping. The Vatican's ancient shortwave array, silent since the ash centuries, crackled to life with the Pope's voice in Latin, "Venite, Filii Lucis." Come, children of light. In Lagos, street preacher spent 30 years announcing the end of days, threw his loudspeaker into the gutter and began dancing. Social media, rebuilt, fragile, glorious, collapsed under the weight of 10 billion people trying to post the same 3 words in every living language. They came back. In the rebuilt city of Lhasa, an archivist who had spent her life translating pre-impact fragments found the only surviving photograph of the original Spark Keeper's ivory tablet. She held it up to her phone camera, tears streaming, and whispered to the live feed, "Look. Look what she wrote. They kept the promise." The tablet's blood-carved words filled screens across the world. We were taken. We endured. One day we will return and pay the debt. In Australis's command deck, the 41 crew stood in a loose semicircle around the main speaker, listening to the flood. Riley Quinn's cocky grin had vanished. He looked suddenly very young and very afraid. Lena Voss clutched the back of a chair so hard her knuckles went white. Samantha Kane closed her eyes and let the tears fall without wiping them away. Caldera said nothing. He simply reached into his pocket, drew out the bone flute older than any civilization currently alive on the planet below, and waited for the noise to settle into something that might, with luck, become a conversation. Rex, quieter than anyone had ever heard the AI, spoke only to the bridge. Incoming messages, 642 million and climbing. Shall I begin translating, sort by latitude, or just open the fire hose and let them drown us in welcome? Cale's answer was soft iron. Open it, Rex. Every voice. Let them drown us. The speakers filled with the sound of a world trying to say thank you all at once. In every tongue, humanity had managed to keep alive through fire, ash, and centuries of night. And somewhere in the roar, a 9-year-old girl in Jakarta found the frequency she had been secretly scanning since she was pressed transmit on her homemade recorder mic, and played the 3 answering notes she had practiced every night under a sky that had never deserved her hope. Clear. Shaky. Perfect. Section 3. The Girl with the Recorder. The chosen ground was the same basalt plateau in the New Guinea highlands, where the first Preservari beams had once touched 74,000 years earlier. No one on Earth knew that. The Cryonixians did. At 5:42 local time, 2 shuttles descended on silent magnetic lift, bellies still glowing faint orange from re-entry. They settled without a sound among knee-high kunai grass, ramps already lowering before the heat tiles stopped ticking. 15,000 people had walked, flown, and climbed for 3 days to reach this place after the global announcement named it. They stood in a living crescent. Highlanders in byless of bird-of-paradise feathers, city children in filtered masks, old women who had survived the ash centuries, soldiers who had laid down rifles the moment the sky spoke. At the focus of the crescent stood one small girl. 9-year-old Kaylis Vey wore a patched jacket 2 sizes too large and held a bright blue plastic recorder that had once belonged to her great-aunt. She had rehearsed the 3 notes every night for the last 72 hours, falling asleep with the instrument still in her mouth. Her mother had tried to stand beside her. Kaylis had shaken her head, fierce and certain. This part was hers alone. When the lead shuttle ramp kissed the basalt, every screen on Earth zoomed tight on her small figure. Caldera stepped out first. He wore plain gray flight trousers and a leather jacket, older than every nation now watching. Silver streaked his hair, the way reactor light once streaked cryonics canyons. In his right hand he carried nothing but the bone flute, yellowed with 74,000 years of handling. He saw the girl immediately. For a moment, the commander of the longest voyage humanity had ever undertaken looked exactly like what he was, a grandfather who had missed every birthday for 8 centuries. Then he walked forward, slowly, deliberately, until he stood 3 meters from her. Kaylis lifted the recorder. Her first note wobbled, fear, altitude, wonder, but the second caught and held, and the third rang clear across the plateau like a struck bell. The same 3 notes that had opened the broadcast, the same 3 notes carved into ivory on a red plain beneath twin suns, the same 3 notes that had kept reactor smiths alive through decade-long nights. When the final note faded, the only sound was 15,000 people remembering how to breathe. Caldera went to one knee so his eyes were level with hers. The cameras caught the tremor in his hand as he lifted the bone flute, mammoth ivory, worn silk smooth by generations of worried thumbs. Kaylis lowered her recorder and spoke, voice small but steady, heard by 10 billion because every microphone on the plateau was live. "You're late." A ripple of tear-choked laughter swept the crescent. Kale's answer came out rough. Traffic was murder. The girl studied him for a long second, then stepped forward and placed her plastic recorder into his free hand, like she was returning something borrowed 100 lifetimes ago. The circle of watchers dropped to their knees, not in submission, but the way you kneel when a story you were told in childhood suddenly walks out of the page and asks for water. High overhead, the second shuttle opened and the rest of the 41 began to descend the ramp. Riley Quinn paused at the top, took one look at the kneeling multitude, and muttered just loud enough for the open comm to catch. "Well, damn. Nobody told me we were bringing religion." Lena Voss elbowed him hard enough to stagger him in the light gravity. "Shut up, Quinn. Some of us have been waiting 74,000 years for this." On the basalt below, Caldera closed his fingers around the plastic recorder, still warm from a child's grip, and for the first time since the neutron star let them go, he smiled like a man who had finally come home. Section 4. The ramp drops. Caldera rose slowly from his knee, the plastic recorder now tucked beside the bone flute in his jacket pocket like twin hearts beating against his ribs. The morning wind coming off the highlands carried the scent of wet grass and distant cook fires, and for one dizzy instant he was 8 years old again, standing on a cryonics ridge while his own grandfather told stories of a single yellow sun. Then the moment passed, and he turned to face the crescent of humanity. Behind him, the second shuttle's ramp kissed Earth with a soft sigh. 40 bodies in simple gray and leather began to walk down it. No formation, no ceremony, just people stepping onto a world their blood had never forgotten. Riley Quinn came first, missing fingers hooked in his belt, trying and failing to look unimpressed. Lena Voss followed, eyes wide, openly crying. Samantha Kane carried a small pot of red cryonics dust wrapped in cloth. Vera Aiken had a canvas bag of dwarf mango seeds slung over one shoulder like she was delivering groceries to a neighbor. They fanned out in a loose arc behind their commander, 41 against 15,000, and suddenly the numbers felt reversed. Cale lifted both hands, empty now, palms forward in the oldest gesture humans ever invented. "We come in peace," he said, voice carrying without amplification because every drone and throat mic on the toe was slave to the global feed. "And we come in hope." Then he did the thing no protocol on either world had prepared for. He stepped forward, off the basalt platform, and walked straight into the kneeling crowd. People flinched, then parted, then realized he was not walking through them. He was walking to them. An old man with cataracts reached out first. Cale clasped his forearm, the way cryonics miners still greeted after a long shift. A teenage girl burst into sobs and hugged him hard enough to lift his boots off the ground. A Highland warrior in cassowary plumes pressed a necklace of dog's teeth into his hand and would not let go until Cale looped it over his own neck. Riley Quinn watched his commander disappear under an avalanche of hands and whispered, "We're going to need a bigger ramp." Lena Voss laughed through her tears and followed, and then the dam broke. The 41 were swallowed by touch, by questions, by grandmothers pinching cheeks to be sure they were real. Someone started singing the three-note phrase in talk pisin. Within seconds 15,000 voices had it, rough and beautiful and off-key in a dozen harmonies. High above, Rex kept the orbital feed live and narrated only to the empty bridge of Astralis. Contact established. Handshakes, 411 in climbing. Hugs, unquantifiable. Personal space, a myth. Recommend we update the first contact manual under the heading Plan B, Get Mobbed by Family. On the ground, Cale finally reached the edge of the platform again. Hair wild, jacket half off one shoulder, dog's teeth clicking against the bone flute in his pocket. He looked back at his crew, scattered now among the crowd like seeds thrown into good soil, and raised both arms. The singing stopped as if cut by a knife. Cale's voice carried to the edge of the highlands and to every speaker on Earth. "Today," he said, "we stop being two stories." He reached out and took the hand of the nearest child, an 8-year-old boy with a missing front tooth and wonder in his eyes. "Today we become one song again." Then he turned toward the rising sun, pulled the boy up onto the platform with him, and together they faced the dawn like it was the first one humanity had ever been allowed to share. Behind them, the Cryonixians and the Earthborn mingled without boundary, trading seeds for photographs, bone dolls for plastic toys, stories for stories, until the plateau looked less like a landing site and more like the biggest, strangest, most beautiful family reunion 10 billion people had ever thrown. And somewhere in the middle of it all, 9-year-old Kalis Vey slipped her small hand into Cale Drace's large one and said very quietly, "I knew you'd come." Cale squeezed once. "We were always coming, little fire. We just had to take the long way around." Section 5. The Weight of Names. By noon, the plateau had become a city of feet and voices. Shuttles ferried dignitaries, journalists, and random lottery winners up from coastal airstrips. Every new arrival stepped off the ramp into the same stunned hush that falls when prophecy and history collide in daylight. The formal meeting was staged on the Jungfrau Skybridge, the same one that in another timeline had been choked with ash and desperation. Now it floated clean and white above the reborn Alps, solar panels glinting like bright scales. Governor Rhea Cole waited at the center, 80 years old in this timeline, hair snow-white but spine straight as a rifle barrel. She wore the simple charcoal suit she had worn for every crisis. 2 aides flanked her, and behind them stood representatives from every surviving polity: Sahel Federation, Amazon Enclave, Pacific Raft Alliance, Antarctic Congress, even the reclusive monks of the High Gobi Observatory. Cale Drace walked the bridge alone. He had refused escort, refused ceremony. The dog's teeth necklace still hung at his throat. The plastic recorder and bone flute made soft clicks in his pocket with every step. When he reached the midpoint, he stopped 3 meters from Rhea Cole and waited. She studied him the way generals study maps before deciding whether to burn a city or save it. "You're shorter than the hollows," she said at last. Cale's mouth twitched. Traveling for a year at 1.2 gravity does things to the spine. Rhea's eyes flicked to the scars on his knuckles, the silver in his hair, the faint tremor in the hand that had carried a torch across centuries. Then she looked past him to the sky where Australis now held geostationary orbit, a new star visible even at noon. Cale reached into his pocket and drew out a small cloth pouch. He loosened the drawstring and let a single dwarf mango seed roll into his palm. Golden brown, perfect, grown in a garden 8 centuries removed from this moment. This grew on a ship that crossed time so your grandmother could die under open sky instead of ash. Plant it wherever she's buried. Let something sweet grow where bitterness tried to root. Rhea stared at the seed for a long moment. Then she closed his fingers over it and clasped his forearm the old way, hard enough to bruise, hard enough to promise. Behind them the cameras rolled, broadcasting to 10 billion people who had never needed to learn the word orphan. The aides shifted uncomfortably. This was not the script anyone had prepared. Rhea ignored them. She leaned in until her forehead almost touched his. "Welcome home, cousin," she whispered. "Try not to break the planet." Cale laughed, one short, startled sound that carried more relief than any speech could have. Then he stepped back, turned to the assembled leaders, and spoke in the same quiet iron voice that had once convinced 40,000 volunteers to vote themselves into 8 centuries of exile. "We bring fusion cores small enough to fit in a backpack and powerful enough to light a city. We bring medical libraries that help you live healthier lives. We bring seeds that laugh at poor soil and children who have never seen a planet without 2 suns. We ask only one thing in return." He paused, letting the wind take his words across the bridge and into every receiver on Earth. "Room to stand beside you, not above, not in front, beside." Silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then Rhea Cole did something no one had seen her do in 50 years of public life. She knelt. Not deep, not theatrical, just enough for her knee to touch the warm metal of the sky bridge. One by one the others followed, warlords, monks, scientists, matriarchs, until every delegate from the world knelt to 41 travelers who had carried fire across time to keep them from ever needing to kneel again. High overhead, Rex watched through the bridge cameras and spoke only to the empty orbit. "Note for the log, humanity just invented a new kind of diplomacy. It rhymes with family reunion and sounds like crying." Section 6. Children Trade Toys. By late afternoon, the plateau had turned into the largest playground humanity had ever known. The formal delegations were still locked in the Jungfrau conference halls, arguing over fusion licenses and orbital slots in 12 languages at once. Down on the grass, none of that mattered. Cryonixian children, biologically 8 to 14, chronologically ancient in their own quiet way, stepped off the last shuttle clutching bone dolls carved to look like long-extinct mammoths, strings of yellow reactor glass beads, and cloth packets of red canyon seeds that smelled like lightning. Earth children met them with the confidence of people who had never known anything but one small sun and stories of ghosts in the sky. No adults organized the exchange. Children simply recognized children. A 12-year-old boy from the Amazon enclave offered a hand-carved sloth made of reclaimed teak to a Cryonixian girl whose name, she said, was Kalis Drace. Yes, the commander's great-great-something grandniece. She took the sloth reverently, turned it over once, then pressed a tiny bone mammoth into his palm. "For your pocket," she said in perfect Portuguese she had learned from the ship's library in a single afternoon. "So you're never alone on night watch." He stared at the little ivory beast, thumb tracing the carved fur, then did something no treaty could have negotiated. He hugged her hard enough to lift her sandals off the ground. 20 meters away, 9-year-old Kalis Vey, the girl with the recorder, had gathered a circle of Earth children like a small general. She was demonstrating how to blow across the end of a bone flute without teeth. A ring of wide-eyed 8-year-olds tried and produced sounds like dying geese. When the Cryonixian keyless Drace wandered over, the two Calyces regarded each other with solemn gravity. "You have my name," Earth Caelus announced. "And you have my song," Space Caelus replied, offering a second, smaller flute carved from Crimson Canyon wood. They traded without ceremony. The circle widened to include both of them, then kept widening. A boy from the Sahel arrived with a fist-sized drone made of scrap solar film and drink cans. It actually flew. A Cryonixian girl traded him a palm-sized crystal that glowed soft gold when you sang the three-note phrase. Within minutes, the sky over the plateau was full of buzzing foil insects and drifting golden lights, and no one could remember which children had come down from the stars and which had been born under this single sun. Someone started a game of tag that crossed 3 continents of origin in the first 30 seconds. Someone else produced a ball made of wound rag and reactor tape. It bounced impossibly high in Earth gravity and was last seen vanishing toward the stratosphere, while 40 children chased it, screaming with joy. Riley Quinn sat on the edge of a shuttle ramp, boots dangling, watching the chaos with the expression of a man who had just discovered laughter was a renewable resource. Vera Aiken appeared beside him with 2 bottles of something amber and illegal. "Beer?" she offered. He took it with his 2 remaining fingers. "I have been alive for 857 years, and this is the best day of all of them." Vera clinked her bottle against his. "Wait till they discover sugar." High overhead, Rex kept a discreet drone circling and recorded everything in high definition for the grandchildren none of them would ever meet on cryonics. The AI's running commentary had gone from dry wit to something perilously close to wonder. Note for the Cultural Archive: Humanity's Universal Translator is apparently 8-year-olds and toys. Time to first unsupervised diplomatic incident: 4 minutes and 32 seconds. Incident classification: hugging-related oxygen deprivation. Status: Section 7. The flute changes hands. Night fell soft and sudden over the New Guinea highlands, the way it only does near the equator. Someone had built a bonfire at the center of the plateau, driftwood carried up by raft children, dried kunai grass, a broken shuttle crate for good measure. The flames leapt high enough to paint every face the color of old gold. The adults had tried to keep the day structured: speeches, handshakes, live feeds to every city. The children had ignored them completely. Now, as the stars came out in their slow millions, even the adults surrendered. Delegates sat cross-legged beside Highlanders. Journalists put down cameras and accepted roasted breadfruit from strangers. Riley Quinn was teaching a circle of Earth pilots how to swear properly in Cryonixian dialect, and they were teaching him worse. Cale Drace stood at the edge of the firelight, watching the 2 strains of humanity braid themselves together like rope that had never truly been cut. He felt the weight of the day settling into his bones the way neutron star gravity once had. Slow, relentless, impossible to ignore. A small hand slipped into his. Caelus Vey, Earth's Caelus, the one with the recorder, looked up at him. Her old patched jacket was gone. Someone had traded her a bright red Cryonixian jacket 3 sizes too big. She had never looked more like the Spark Keeper in the old carvings. "It's time," she said simply. Cale knew exactly what she meant. He let her lead him through the crowd to the fire's heart. People parted without being asked. The noise, laughter, singing, the pop of opening bottles fell into a waiting hush, the way the sea pulls back before a wave no one saw coming. Caelus Vey stopped at the edge of the flames and turned to face him. Every screen still lived on the plateau, every drone, every phone held aloft, zoomed tight on the small girl and the old man who had carried tomorrow in his pocket for 8 centuries. Cale went to one knee again, the same way he had that morning. Firelight caught the dog's teeth at his throat and the silver in his hair. He reached into his jacket and drew out the bone flute, mammoth ivory, worn thin as parchment, older than agriculture, older than cities, older than every promise except one. He held it out across both palms. "This belonged to the first woman who ever watched her children rise into golden light," he said. voice low but carrying to the edges of the fire and to 10 billion speakers beyond. She carved the promise with her own blood so no one would forget why we were taken, or why we had to come back. Kalis took the flute with both hands, solemn as coronation. "Your turn to keep the song," Kale told her. She lifted the flute to her lips. The first attempt squeaked. The second caught the 3 notes perfectly. Clear, steady, rising like smoke into the tropical night. When the final note faded, the silence felt holy. Then, from somewhere near the back, Riley Quinn, 26 forever, missing 2 fingers, eyes red from wood smoke or something else, produced a bottle of earth beer and raised it high. "To the Spark Keeper," he shouted, voice cracking. "Wherever she's watching." 40,000 voices on the plateau and 10 billion beyond answered with the 3 notes, ragged and perfect and human all at once. Kalis lowered the flute and looked at Kale Drace. "Will you teach me the rest?" she asked. He smiled, tired and whole and finally home. "Little fire," he said. "We've got the rest of our lives." Behind them, Riley took a long pull from the bottle, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and discovered he was crying without shame into beer that tasted like sunlight and forgiveness. Vera Aiken appeared at his elbow with another bottle and bumped his shoulder. "Welcome to the short way around, flyboy." Riley clinked his bottle against hers, looked up at the single yellow moon riding high over a world that had never needed saving, and laughed until he couldn't breathe. The fire burned higher. Children fed it toys they no longer needed alone. And somewhere in the sparks rising toward the Milky Way, 2 strains of humanity became one story again. Section 8. The circle closes. The bonfire had settled into slow, steady coals by the time the singing began in earnest. It started with one cryonixian reactor smith, barely 25 biologically, voice rough from centuries of lullabies sung to fusion fires, who stood and struck the 3-note phrase against his thigh like a hammer on anvil. Another answered from the far side of the fire, then 10, then 100. Earth voices caught the rhythm without being taught, the way lungs catch breath. No one conducted. No one needed to. The circle tightened until every shoulder touched another. Highlander feathers brushing flight leather jackets, radiation cloaks tangled with canyon-woven scarves. Someone began the old cryonixian round, the one sung in forges when nights lasted decades, and earth throats shaped the alien syllables until they sounded like they had always belonged here. Kale Drace stood between the 2 Kalises, one small hand in each of his, letting the song move through him like blood returning to a limb that had been asleep for 74,000 years. The bone flute was gone from his pocket now, passed forward into tomorrow, and the emptiness felt right. High overhead, Astralis drifted across the face of the moon, a silver needle trailing no fire tonight. Rex had dimmed every running light except the forward observation blister, where the AI kept solitary vigil. The ship's voice, soft, almost shy, came over the open channel only the 41 still wore in their earpieces. Recording audio return is off the charts. Harmonic convergence at 98.7% and climbing. Translation: they're singing in perfect unison across 2 calendars, 2 star systems, and 1 very long debt. Lena Voss, sitting on a log with her boots off and tears cutting clean trails through the soot on her cheeks, laughed once. "Tell them the balance is 0, Rex." A pause, as though even the AI needed to swallow. "Already done, kid. Log entry timestamp 2040-14 local. Debt paid. Interest, 1 living cradle. Balance, 0. On the ground, the song rose into a single held note that seemed to lift the night itself. When it finally broke, the silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of a house after the last guest has been welcomed home. Governor Rhea Cole found Kale in the hush. She carried 2 tin cups of something that smelled like fermented mango and regret. "My people want to rename the planet," she said without preamble. "Something about 2 suns, 1 heart. I told them to sleep on it." Kale accepted the cup. "Our people already have a name for tonight. Second First Dawn." Rhea clinked her cup against his. "Works for me." They drank. The liquor burned clean. Somewhere behind them, Riley Quinn had fallen asleep sitting up, head on Vera Aiken's shoulder, beer bottle still clutched in his 2 remaining fingers. Samantha Kane was teaching a circle of Earth astronomers the names of the constellations as seen from cryonics, far different than Earth's. Children from both worlds lay in heaps like puppies, bone dolls and plastic recorders tangled together in the grass. The coals popped once, sending a small galaxy of sparks upward. Cale Drace looked up through them to the single yellow moon and the bright ship keeping watch above it, and spoke so quietly, only the wind and the woman beside him heard. We were taken, we endured, we returned. Rhea Cole finished the ancient vow without thinking, and the spark never went out. She turned to him then, 80 years old and suddenly young in firelight. Stay, she said. It was not a request from a governor, it was family. Cale's answer was to set his empty cup down, take the spark keeper's great-granddaughter's hand, the one who now carried the flute, and walk with her toward the dying fire, where the last voices were already rising into a new song none of them had known an hour ago. Above them all, Rex closed the ship's eternal log with a single private line glowing soft gold against the dark, mission complete. The cradle is whole. Good night, little fire. Good night. Section 9. The Mango under Yellowstone. 8 months later, the caldera of what had once been Yellowstone was no longer a black wound in the continent. Spring grass rippled across 2,000 square kilometers of reborn earth. Bright green shot through with the first brave spears of fireweed and lupine. Bison, descendants of the last zoo herds, grazed beside pronghorn that had never known ash. A small herd of mammoths, woolly calves cloned from cryonixian gene vaults, trumpeted at the edge of the thermal pools, their breath pluming in the cool morning air like living memories. At the exact center of the old impact scar stood a single dwarf mango tree, no taller than a child. Its trunk was still thin, its leaves glossy and new, but the first pale blossoms had already opened, perfuming the wind with a sweetness no North American spring had ever carried before. Dr. Corin Vale, 79, hair gone snowblind white, refusing stasis because someone had to be old enough to remember what almost happened, knelt in the rich volcanic soil with a battered tin watering can. He poured slowly, carefully, the way you pour the last of the wine at a wedding. Around him, children from both cradles sat in a loose circle, quiet for once. Earth children in bright cotton. Cryonixian children in canyon reds and reactor grays. A few wore mixed clothing now. One small boy sported a feather headdress over a flight jacket 3 sizes too big. They had come on the Don Maglev from New Geneva, then hiked the final kilometer because some places still deserved footfalls. Corin set the can aside and looked at the tree the way a man looks at a miracle he helped smuggle through time. This, he said, voice soft enough that every child leaned in, came from a garden that floated 819 years above a dead star. It grew tomatoes while we slept, mangoes while we cried, and never once dropped a single fruit it wasn't ready to give away. He reached into his coat and drew out a small cloth pouch, the same one Cale Drace had carried across centuries. From it he took one perfect golden mango, smaller than an adult fist, warm from the sun. I was supposed to wait until the first real harvest, he told them, but some things shouldn't wait. He sliced the fruit with a pocket knife, older than most nations. The scent rolled out like summer made solid. One by one he handed pieces to sticky, reverent hands until only the stone remained. Corin pressed the flat seed into the soil at the base of the young tree and covered it with both palms. Second planting, he announced. First one was for the winter that never came. This one's for every winter still ahead. May they all be gentle. A small voice piped up from the back. Kalis Vey, now 10, bone flute on a cord around her neck, like a medal. Can we sing it in? Corin smiled the way sunrise smiles. Thought you'd never ask. The children rose without needing order. Earth Kalis lifted the bone flute. Space Kalis, her hair now braided with earth beads, stood beside her. Together they played the 3-note phrase that had once kept reactor fires alive across 1,000 years of storms. The circle of children answered, voices bright and unafraid. Some knew the Cryonixian words, some the Talk Peace in translation, some only the tune. It didn't matter. The song rose over the green caldera and rolled out across a continent that had never been glassed, never been buried, never had to learn the taste of ash. High overhead, a single silver shuttle passed silently, Astralis herself, making one last orbit before decommissioning into a museum. Rex's voice, warm and fond and almost sleepy, drifted across the open channel only the oldest crew still monitored. Audio return, 100% convergence. The Cradle is singing in one voice again. Recommend we call this mission accomplished and go get some sleep. On the ground, Corin Vale closed his eyes and let the children's song settle into the soil around the new roots. When the last note faded, he opened them again and looked at the tree, at the children, at the wide blue sky that belonged to all of them now. Somewhere under that sky, Cale Drace was teaching a class of mixed-world pilots in New Geneva. Riley Quinn was finally learning to surf in the Maldives. Lena Voss and Rex were arguing over whether an AI could adopt human grandchildren. And here, at the heart of a wound that never opened, a mango tree no one had needed to plant for survival put out its first tender leaves toward a single yellow sun. The circle was closed. The debt was paid. The spark, bright, reckless, and eternally human, burned on.